Welcome to the inaugural Writing for Liberation virtual teach-in presented by Black Writers for Peace and Social Justice, a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 2024 by writer, educator, multidisciplinary artist, mother, and community organizer Khadijah Ali-Coleman. Black Writers for Peace and Social Justice envisions a world where stories are tools for liberation, the arts are central to social justice movements, and diverse voices lead the way toward understanding empathy, justice, and equity. Since May 2024, we have provided services, supports, and opportunities to over 100 writers through a weekend writing retreat, a summer youth media academy, free and low-cost writing workshops, Poets Day party meetups, calls for submissions for the Rebels Zygust digital literary journal, monthly newsletters, Poets in the Park summer meetup series, virtual readings, and our inaugural Wellness and Vitality Refresh event. This Writing for Liberation virtual teach-in is intended to engage with Black writers in an intensive weekend of conversations, book list sharing, readings, and skill building to engage in the movement of using writing as a form of liberatory practice. Liberatory practice refers to approaches and actions aimed at dismantling systems of oppression and promoting freedom, equality, and empowerment for individuals and communities. It involves critical reflection, challenging power structures, and fostering inclusive and equitable environments. Liberatory practices are often rooted in the experiences and perspectives of marginalized groups and seeks to create positive change through conscious awareness, analysis, action, and accountability. Our second live panel during the Writing for Liberation virtual teach-in is Designing Your Writing Life, Tips on Getting Started as a Writer, a virtual roundtable discussion with writers Slangston Hughes, Tiffany Vakilian, Femi Lewis, and moderated by writer Khadijah Ali-Coleman. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the Writing for Liberation virtual teach-in. My name is Khadijah Ali-Coleman. I'm so happy to have you here. If you hear little murmurs and weird sounds behind me, please pardon me. Those are my doggies who have no type of cooth because they're animals. But I am so grateful to have everyone here today. This is our second live panel for the virtual teach-in. We also have additional content that can be found on the teach-in page. Everyone that registered for this teach-in should have received multiple emails at this point from me, with the contact information to get to the teach-in page, as well as the login for the page is located on our website at blackwritersforpeace.org. If for any reason you haven't received, okay, stop. It's like children. If for any reason you haven't received the login information, please send me an email at I have like 3 businesses and I have to get them all together at blackwritersforpeace.org. That is learning at blackwritersforpeace.org. And I will respond to your email as soon as possible to give you that information. On the teach-in page, you will find the pre-recorded podcast episodes that all dropped today, interviews with Raymond Winbush, who is an expert on reparations, as well as a published writer who has many books out that range from parenting to reparations. I also have an interview on there with Adrian Ingram, who is an agent and the vice president of Serendipity Literary Agency. There's also an interview with Kimon Freeman, who recently ran for Congress out of Washington, D.C., but he also is a multi-genre writer, a playwright, and a novelist. And then just ending, or probably it's in the last minutes, is an interview with Tongo Asane Martin, who is the 8th poet laureate of San Francisco and is really a renowned poet and activist currently based in Detroit. And so And it's also a recording from the panel that took place last night, which is Writing for Liberation with No Fear. And so today we are together, gathered for our second live panel. This is a panel for those of you who are still really um, designing your writer life. And so that is the title, getting started with um your writing as a writer. Our panelists today, we have Tiffany Vakilian. She is an award-winning artist, best-selling author, professional editor to other bestsellers, and a performer committed to helping people collaborate for awareness and global connection. Tiffany has her master's and certification in transformative language arts with ASCAP, the National Forensics League, the Transformative Language Arts Network, the Independent Book Publishers Association, and the Editorial Freelancers Association. As CEO and founder of Speak Fire Publishing, she believes in the power of universal connections available through spoken, written, sung, and embodied word art. And she created Dual Expression to help writers find their voices to tell their stories. And hopefully we'll be able to learn more about that in our conversation today. So you want to wave? I haven't pinned everyone yet, but say hey.
Hello, everybody. I'm honored to be here. Let's go.
Yeah. Yay. And so next up, I'd like to introduce to you Femi Lewis. Femi Lewis is a New York City-based freelance writer specializing in entrepreneurship and content marketing. In addition to serving as the African American history expert for Thought.com in the past, Lewis has been published in national publications such as Black Enterprise, the South Florida Sun Sentinel, Fort Worth Star Telegram, and Kansas City Star. She is owner of Femi Writes. She's a mother, and she is someone that I met over 15 years ago at the Mosaic
Mhm.
Literary Conference in New York would
Yes.
take place at Hostess Community College, and we'll talk more about that. But from the wonderful now just have brain fog, having a senior moment. What is literary? What is Ron Kavanaugh's organization out of the Bronx?
Um,
Well, Literary Freedom Project.
yes. Let
And so
is
I
killing
consider
me for not saying that quick enough.
right. So I consider you an activist as well, even if you don't identify as such, but you are an educator, a writer, and you've coached others. So welcome, Femi. We
Thank you.
also have, yes, we also have, this is a packed panel of fantastic people who are not only writers, but have also coached and worked with other people. So we also have with us Victor Rogers, also known as Slangston Hughes. That is the only name in which I know him as and by. He is in stature and in credentials in terms of being an artist. He is a national slam champion based out of Baltimore, Maryland. He is the former artistic director of Do More Baltimore and the former coach of the two-time world champion Baltimore City Youth Poetry Team. He is the founder of the seven-time champion Slamageddon Baltimore Adult Slam Team, famous for the most wins in poetry slam history. And he is the author of several books, including the poetry collection Slanguage, Arts and Griot Glimpse, and God's Favorite Breakdance Move. And he is someone who I have been in relationship with as in community with. I don't want to start no rumors, Slangston. I don't know if you have a partner. I'm not trying to get my ass beat, but we have been in community with each other as artists for over a decade through my work with my arts company, Liberated Muse. So it's an honor to have you here, Slangston. And then last but certainly not least, we have Malik Thompson. Malik Thompson is a Black queer person from Washington, D.C. His work has been published in the Cincinnati Review, Denver Quarterly, Poet Lore, and elsewhere. He has received fellowships and residencies from organizations including Cave Canem, Lambda Literary, the Anderson City, and Sundress Publications. Malik lives in D.C., where he works as a bookseller at the Black, Asian, and queer-owned Loyalty Bookstores, and he is at work on his debut full-length collection. And I have to say, I don't even know if this is what you're supposed to do when you are on one of those panels where you're a grant reviewer. I don't think you're supposed to reach out to someone whose work you've reviewed and tell them that you think that they are stellar. And just so I became a stalker of Malik.
That's beautiful, though.
I was on a grant panel and read
It's
his
easy to
work.
do.
And I actually, so I will, so let me say this because this is recorded. I don't want people to really think I stalked this man. But I actually, he was part of a program that I was hosting, and I saw his name. And I said, "Oh my God!" And so I was like a groupie. Malik is a fantastic artist, literary artist, and I am that person who asks him and badgers him every time, "Where is the book? Where is the book? Where is the book?" But I invited Malik to be part of this conversation because despite not having a book, Malik is probably one of the most published people that I know in terms of being featured in journals and in other places and actually navigating this literary world as a workshop facilitator as well. And so you can tell from his bio that he's engaged in this literary life in many facets as a writer, working for a bookstore, as a facilitator, working with other creatives as he works on his own work. So it's a pleasure to have you, Malik. If you can just say hello so folks can find you, and I'm going to pin all of us so that we can be seen by everyone.
Yeah, first, sorry for being late. Everybody was coming from work. Buses decided to be slow. There's a heat wave that probably has something to do with it. But first, thank you so much, Khadijah, for bringing me into this space. The way you receive my work, the way you give me accolade, the way you celebrate me is just always so beautiful and appreciated. And,
Aw.
I just really appreciate you too. The appreciation is deeply mutual and all you do to
Aw.
host literary space for
Oh.
Black people. But yeah, if you all want to follow me, you can find me at Late Summer Star on IG. I can put that in the chat.
Yeah, so I thank you for that. And I would like to say at this time, since I've introduced all of our panelists for today, I do want to let those who have joined us live and who are part of the audience, I want to reiterate what I said last night during the first panel, that this is a teach-in. And the idea of a teach-in is that everyone who participates is a co-facilitator of some sort. And so even if I'm asking for your mic to be muted throughout our roundtable discussion today, I am going to ask you to liberally use our chat feature. So at this time, I would love it if everybody can just put in drop in the chat where you're coming from. What I think I acknowledged where some of our panelists are coming from, but Tiffany, you're out of California. Is it LA? Are you in LA?
No, I'm in San Diego, but
San Diego, you're in the Bay. Okay, so
yeah.
Tiffany is in San Diego, Femi is in New York, Malik is in DC, Slangston and I are in Baltimore, and so we would love to know where you are coming from. I didn't realize that the teaching was international until last night, where we had people from Nigeria, just different parts. I know we had someone from Spain. And so let folks know. I also want to remind folks that in addition to the teach-in space that's on our website that has the content from the teach-in, I also have invited you to join us on Facebook for those who still use Facebook, which definitely is a telling generational thing because everybody's not on Facebook still. But we also have a discussion board that you can access through the teaching space. And so in this chat today, please feel free if you yourself are a writing coach, or if you have questions, or if you have any type of resource that you'd like to share, please put in the chat because the chat will be shared with the other teaching participants. And so be mindful of that when posting, that this will be something that will be shared with other teaching participants. And so with that, I would like for us to get started with our conversation. And so as you know by the title, we're going to talk about getting started on this writerly journey. I would love it if all of our participants, if you panelists, if you can start with just I feel like with writers, it's always some moment where you moved from writing for yourself to having your work shared with an audience. And I want to just specify with this panel, that's what we're talking about. So we're not talking about getting started as a writer, journaling for yourself. We're doing really interior type of work. We really are talking about where we move, our writing moves from being something that is insular or personal to something that now is for an audience. And I'm anticipating from your questions, some of you who are interested not only writing for an audience, but professionalizing your writing pathway and sticking to the theme of this teaching, where it's about liberatory practice. And so I defined liberatory practice last night as really being this practice where your work is dedicated to speaking truth to power, looking at spaces as equitable, and really fueling movement toward equity in spaces that you are part of. All right. And so let's start with Slangston. If you can start with that moment, you have a very the longevity in your career as a slam artist, as a poet, really is something I think that is not common for someone who has really professionalized this type of work. So I would really love to know when that transition happened for you, and if you can give us a synopsis of it so that we can hear from every panelist.
Well, it's kind of a bit of a unique journey for me, um, kind of being of multiple worlds, as an artist, and coming from my origin story really begins in hip hop and in performance. And so it was really Coppin State was really the place, along with Baltimore in general, that led to things on the literary side. And it played a significant role in both the stage and the page world because, being a Coppin led to also being involved as an educator. And so all of those worlds really converged and evolved simultaneously. But specifically, it was, certain professors and community at Coppin that led to me having connections on the page side of things and submitting work, literary journals and stuff. That all kind of converged and even led more to being a part of the education of writing for so long on both the performance and on the literary side. So it really kind of all just coalesced, if you will. So I think like my first interaction with the published part of things was again Coppin, and they used to have the annual a nationally renowned writers conference there every year. And that's where I saw Hakeem Adabuti for the first time. That's where I was in Sonia Sanchez's workshop. I saw Mary Baraka read the same year that the infamous "Somebody Blew Up America" poem came out in 2001, and then also that same year, Cornelius Eady was there doing a workshop connected to Kaveh Khanum. And so for me, very early on, I didn't really see the separation of the page world and the stage world that a lot
Wow.
of people often talk about and experience. Like for me, there were always these, linked things. And I come from the school of like the Black Arts District, and my first interaction with learning about poetry and about literature was from those kind of writers, from that school of thought where you talk about the Black Arts movement and you talk about even like the beat poets, like there was really no separation. Like people who had work published, like Sonia Sanchez's and the Mary Barakas of that day, they were very much known and celebrated as, performance poets as well. And some of the most engaging and riveting performances I ever saw in person were seeing like a Mary Baraka or Sonia Sanchez read their work from a book at a podium, but with the energy of like a rock concert. So for me, it was always weird where it was like there was always this separation between the slam world and the literary world and the academia. And because the Western world does everything it can to separate and commodify the art that we create, which is all art. But just because of the way I was engaged with it early on and the way that I was brought up in the world of words, it was always weird to me that it was this separation. And so I've always been a champion of bridging that gap. And it's kind of like this invisible veil that doesn't really exist. Because at the end of the day, if your writing is really worth anything, I feel like it has the ability to live out loud, but also live in the book and in the academic realms with all the technical stuff that is needed. Like you should be able to say it out loud and it resonate, but you should also be able to have someone else read it without your voice present and it still resonate if it's truly at its highest potential.
Oh wow. I want to address the fact that what you said about seeing Amiri Baraka and Sonia Sanchez, I believe you used the exact same words. I interviewed 2 or 3 years ago poet Alan King. He's gonna be reading with us tomorrow during the reading, but he said the exact same thing, seeing Sanchez perform, and it was like seeing a concert and just mesmerized by the delivery. And Tongo is saying in the interview with him also said that you can have a conversation with Sanchez and poetry won't come up one
Yep.
time because of who she is as a writer, is who she is as an educator, is who she is as a community member, is who she is. And so when you talk about it's not this separation between performance and reading or writing, but also how this type of art is so inclusive to who you are. As you know, I just think that you articulated that so perfectly. And I need to talk with you because I didn't know that Coppin had that going on. I
Yeah.
teach at Coppin now, and so we got to talk about how to bring that kind of flavor back. But I would love it if we can move to Tiffany, if you can, same question, if you can tell us that moment where you moved from writing privately or reading to then becoming a writer, as you are now.
I gotta follow Slangston. Whew. No, you honor me for real. So my journey, I guess you could say, was more straightforward, but what is that really? I grew up, I went to a PWI. I was from Baltimore, but my mom and dad moved out to California, then got divorced. So all of my upbringing was kind of adjacent or otherized because I was just strange. I'm sitting here, I'm listening to Enya, I'm reading Sartre, I'm reading Jung, I'm reading Lewis Carroll, like all these different things. But I didn't know it was just because I was just gathering language. I was gathering language. I have a love of the written word, the spoken word, the embodied word. So that's another reason why transformative language arts just pinged me. And I resonated deeply with the whole degree system. Too bad the college is closed. But it became real for me in 2015 when I lived through the worst day of my life. And a couple of you might have heard this story before because we've been on panels before. But in 2015, I was pregnant. And even though I was only 13, 14 weeks, I looked like I was 27 weeks because of fibroids. And the pain was so bad. They had me on Norco on a 3-hour situation. once um once I took it, the pain never really went away. It just kind of didn't interrupt my life to the point of me screaming all the time. And when I trigger alert, this might be some traumatic for some of y'all, so just prepare. I had a spontaneous miscarriage and the doctor that same day said I'm cautiously optimistic. So that was the point. That was the worst point. But then 3 months later, my older brother passed away. And so everybody around me was dealing with just the minutia of getting him. He was in Costa Rica. We had to get him back in the country. And every time
Wow.
I would talk about Moses, somebody would bring up my brother Andrew. with like no shade. Everybody was processing. I knew Moses intimately because he was within me, but to everybody else, he was possibility. Everyone was excited, but they didn't have that relationship. So I just wrote. I'd always been writing my whole life, poetry, bits and pieces, and things like that. And I wasn't doing well. I was failing, really. I was just not doing well. And I'd always wanted to be a writer, but I didn't the sharing never felt authentic. And I wrote my story out, took my poetry, took my journal entries, put it together, sent it to my homegirl. And she didn't say anything for a few days, but then she reached back out to me and she picked up the phone, I pick up the phone, and she just starts crying. And that's when I could breathe. And that's when I knew I had reached a point of authenticity, of sharing, and how powerful it can be. And I knew that's what I wanted to do with my life. And everything I've done since then has been a version of me reaching down to that most authentic part of me and sharing it with the world, and then inviting other people to do that. And some people are not ready for that room.
Mhm.
Oh, but when they are, and when they can share it, they set other people free, and it's this beautiful moment. And books can sell, but more than that, it's the powerful way that we connect. I wish I've been to slam poetry in Baltimore one time because I snuck out back when I lived there, but I met Khadijah getting taking a chance and scared the whole time. Khadijah, the whole time I was scared you were going to bust me up and say, "What are you doing here?" I want to write about your play. And all of these different things.
Well, that's I want to stop you right there because I find it very interesting that you make a distinction between your creative writing life
Mm,
and, memoir writing and that
mm.
personal type of writing
Yeah,
versus the journalism that you were doing before
right. Because
then. Because
I was
that is how
trained.
we met. Is that you
Hmm.
covered I was touring one of my
Running them
plays.
up.
Yep, yep, yep. And so you were a writer and you were writing for a public audience before then, but it's
Hmm.
this distinction of writing for a public audience telling your story. And so I just think that that's really interesting because I think that also speaks to a lot of people who may be writers and maybe getting
Hmm.
paid or have writing that's out there as a journalist or storytelling for an organization, but there is a
But they're not answering the
distinction.
question of liberation. There, and that
Yes.
liberation has to start in the bottom of your inside, in the deepest place you
Mm,
can go, and you will never go deep enough. There's always going to be another layer that you can find, that you can dig down into. And the minute you are that honest, then you
hmm.
realize, oh, there's a whole nother room down here. And then you can
Yeah,
explore that. And one word can send you on a journey and that can really resonate cities. The
yeah.
whole just let me stop because then I'll just get
Well, I actually want to parking lot that because I think that you bring up a very important part that this panel will deconstruct even further because there's a power in unleashing that type of vulnerability that many people are very afraid of. Myself, I grapple with that even still, having written for a very long time. And so I appreciate you bringing that for sharing something so deeply traumatic, but that being part of your story to lead you to where you are now. So thank you for that. And so I'm going to move to Femi, and then we're going to the last to answer the question will be Malik. But Femi, if you can answer the same question.
Sure. So I was just thinking, oh, how am I going to answer this? So I will say this. There's a part of me as a writer that has always been public, and there's a part that's still private and is still growing. So I'll talk about the public part because I always knew, even from a child, that I wanted to be a journalist. And so that was like, what do? I go to college and I take these journalism classes and I write for the school paper. Um, and so I remember I did that and I went to a college internship fair. that, and there were all of these newspapers there from all over the country. And I had my clips from school because they said you write on the school newspaper and then you'll be able to get something. And all I got was no, 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 no. And I was like, I got to one and I was just like, so like, what is this? And they were like, well, you have no um daily experience. Yeah, it was interesting. How do you get daily experience when your school newspaper is kind of like running on a monthly or bi-weekly kind of thing? So, needless to say, my first internship was at Black Enterprise. I got it in the weirdest way. My friend worked around the corner at as a hostess, and the HR person would come in there and see her doing her work while she was supposed to be seating people and offered her a job. And she said, oh no, my friend is a journalism major. And she got me an internship there. So I used those clips, and got an internship at the Jersey Journal writing obits. And then that opened up Daily Journal. Um, and so I just kind of grew from there. But it was interesting to be so young and get so many no's in something that you really desired, and realize that there was a big leap between what your school could offer and what the real world expected of you, even as a college student. So, that just kind of set me up for always understanding you got to understand that gap as a writer, what you think is acceptable and what spaces need you to be able to do. So, I hope I answered that question.
I think you did. I think you did, and I think you brought up something that I would love for us to talk about further, because what it sounds like is when we hear the word manifesting a lot,
Mhm.
we often think of it of things coming, just appearing, but a lot of manifesting is around making something happen despite the obstacles placed in your way, but despite the messaging that you have to do something a certain way. And once we really begin to believe that we can, there may be obstacles, there may be people telling us in our ear saying that the way to do this is such and such, and that we can circumvent that by being creative and just
Absolutely.
creating our own pathways. I think that we'll have different experiences. And that's what I think of when I think of manifesting. Yesterday I talked a little bit about the fact that on the panel were people who with very credentialed and storied backgrounds, with no one having an MFA. And, for those of us who have been in this writing game for a while, a lot of people will tell you that that's the pathway to publishing. And that, especially when we think,
It's not.
and right, and when we think of
I
publishing,
have
that there's
one.
only one,
It's not.
right. So all of those rules we learn through trial and error, that they really don't amount to much. And I think this is a great segue to bring you in the conversation, Malik, because I know you and I have had offline conversations about that, and the fact that you have such a resume with being published, and you defy a lot of these things that people say you have to do before you become a published writer. So can you talk a little bit about your foray into writing?
Yeah, yeah, I began to orbit around the DC Youth Slam team, which was like DC's spoken word um performance troupe back when I was a teenager in like 2013, 2014, and that was my exposure to like poetry in a way that felt resonant. It wasn't just like, oh, dead white dudes on some page in school, but it's like Black youth, youth of color, queer youth, people living in all those intersections, like speaking really powerfully and beautifully and tragically about their lived experiences often. And so, I began to read other poets. Like I'm not a performance poet at all or spoken word poet at all, but I really admire and respect those people who don't um, abide by the distinction between page and stage, because that's sort of the community that got me into poetry. So, I began to write, and I didn't write well for a very long time. I have this folder of poems I wrote from before 2018, and they're all like really terrible. But I had to write those because, like anything else, writing is a skill. You develop your abilities and your faculties, and you learn and you grow, you read. Um, and so those are useful. I still look at them every now and then. But yeah, I think when I returned home from Rochester, New York, I lived there in 2017, something unlocked for me. And I began to feel proud of the poems I was writing and like began sending them out for submission. And some of them started to get picked up, and I was like, oh, okay, there's something here. Other people see it, they're willing to put it out in the spaces that they're curating, the literary spaces they're curating. And then in 2023, I was accepted into Cave Canem, right? And so there are these like different layers to it for me, right? There's the layer of like, oh, I feel good about my writing. Oh, other people feel good about my writing. Oh, I got accepted into Cave Canem. And I'm just going to brief tangent. I feel like there's a lot of mythos about Cave Canem and a lot of tension around it. Like it's often perceived as an elitist space, which I understand and I can see why people have that perception. I will also say, in my experience, it is one of the most welcoming communities I've ever experienced in the literary world, period. Like people were so kind, people were so welcoming of different types of poems. People were so generous with their feedback, both in the way that they gave critical feedback and also the way that attention paid to the poems. So I just want to name that. Like, oh, yes, it is very difficult to get into Cave Canem because of the sheer number of people who apply. And also, Cave Canem poets are not some highfalutin, it's not some paper bag test place. Like, it's real chill. Um, I don't know why I felt the need to defend Cave Canem, but but I do.
I think it's appreciated because I think anything where that's real, any place that's really selective, it's going to have, as you say, this mythos, like people creating what but in it just like anything with publications, it's subjective to the judges, and so your work it is amazing, but it was what the judges resonated with them. Not to say that someone else's work who didn't get in, and I think that that is when we talk about this writing journey further, that we'll talk about the rejection and those things and not turning it inward, but also not creating some type of rejection of places that reject you. And so I think you need to represent for your place. Like Cave
Yeah.
Canem, yeah, you need to
Uh,
represent.
And also just to finish, because I know we know time, but I was originally put on the wait list for Cave Canem, so it was like not a shoe-in for me. It was like, oh, is this going to happen? And then, I don't have an MFA, I don't have a BFA. Uh, I did not go to higher education for writing. So, the system that's established, the rules that people say we should abide by, they don't matter really. All that matters is you doing the work that you believe in, and then you find the people that also believe in your work. At least that's the case for my experience. And I'll just end it there.
I appreciate you for sharing that. And because you then have gone on to get fellowships and things that have paid you to be able to um and feed your writing life in addition to the work. And so I will briefly just say as a writer, I entered writing when I was in elementary school. I was in a pull-out gifted and talented program where that was encouraged, and I was like, we get to write, like what? And so I was writing all types of things, but then I started writing letters to the editor when I was in high school, complaining, and they would always post and publish because I was just an old woman as a teenager and just had a lot to say. And so, in my memory book, I didn't even have a yearbook. I had a memory book where people were like, I hope you go into journalism or something because you got a lot to say. You got a lot of questions. And I wasn't offended by that because I do. I have a lot to say. And I did. I went into writing, but I went into education and nonprofit and decided to freelance write. because I wanted to write what I wanted to write about. And so there was a freedom in freelancing and that allowed me to do that in addition to my 9 to 5. And then I could choose, I could pitch stories about things that I wanted to write about. And some of the highlights of my writing career as a journalist included I covered Kelly Williams Bowler, if you all recall. She was the woman many years ago who got in prison because she was sending her children to school in the neighborhood where her father lived, and someone ratted her out, and that was a whole issue around taxation and school systems. And so I wanted to really write about things that I wanted to know the story about. But like Tiffany, was definitely a different entry into being a journalist for me, and I separate the two as well as a creative writer. And I would say only recently would I say that my writing in terms of vulnerability has expanded. Craft wise, in recent years, I was the poet laureate of my county. And that speaks to what Malika's talking about. Like, I didn't get into Cave Canem. I applied like 3 times and haven't gotten in, but then I become poet laureate without a book. I've gotten awards and things like that. And so what has always driven me when moving into spaces has really been its alignment with have who I want to be identified as when it comes to writing. Am I writing about what I want? Am I writing about something that is important to me? And if so, then I'm going to make it happen, regardless of what those obstacles are in my pathway. And so I don't, I know I said it to the panelists offline, but I do want to remind those who are here today is that everyone on this panel, as they shared their story about becoming a writer, they also have worked in some capacity as a coach to others, an educator, a teacher, a workshop facilitator. And so my next question to you all is, what are some of these things that you're seeing? And before I even go there, for those who are listening in the chat, can you please put in the chat what type of writing that you do and what type of writing life do you wish to design for yourself? We would love to know why you are here, and also to kind of, that will help me framing some of my subsequent questions. If you can answer, what type of writing life are you trying to design for yourself? And if you are currently writing, what are you writing? Okay. And so if you all can start writing that in the chat, I want to ask the panelists to share what are some of the things that you're seeing with those that you work with, the challenges that are stopping people from really engaging in this writer life. Like, what are some of the things that are frightening them or challenging them, particularly when we think of liberatory practice being someone that can speak your truth. I know I do a lot of work around homeschooling. I have another company devoted to Black families who homeschool, and the biggest obstacle to that is the mindset of the parent, for them to even see beyond this idea of education having to be, we don't have to be in a classroom. You don't have to create a homeschool practice that looks like traditional schooling. And so once parents break through that and can say, oh my God, this can really be anything that I envision, it becomes an entirely different conversation with them. And they show up in spaces that I curate differently than they did before. So for you all, how are people showing up to you before you start engaging with them as a writing coach or educator? And what are some of the breakthroughs that you're helping them facilitate or work through?
So I'll go first. I think two big things: imposter syndrome and analysis paralysis, right? So imposter syndrome, am I as good as everybody says I am? Analysis paralysis, yeah, I'm gonna do it, but all of these other things need to be perfect. And somebody said to me years ago, done is better than perfect. And that is what I say. Like, if you have some words down on the paper, you can definitely close your notebook or close that laptop screen, close the iPad, and come back to it 20 minutes later and read it and find changes that you can make. But if you don't get started, right, have something on the page, nothing's going to happen. And I think that's probably the best way to get people going. Sometimes when I work with people, and I only do self-help books, I don't do any kind of like fiction. But the first thing I do is just ask a bunch of questions about the topic that they want to talk about and why they want to talk about it. And we just kind of get into a flow so that they realize their intention and their purpose. And that typically will help you deal with what I call the two ugly stepsisters. So
I'd like to follow up as someone who actually worked with Femi, who dealt with those same two things. And I would like to tell you in front of everybody here that trauma, 5-day trauma book that I worked on, that was something where I explored beyond my comfort zone because I wanted to bring people into that room and have them know you're going into this room and how to curate this place.
Oh, I had no idea that you were a client of Femi's. I didn't even know that. This is
But it's your
fantastic.
fault. It's your fault because you had me, Femi, and Malik on a panel. Malik was actually the what's it, the host?
Yeah,
Facilitator. Thank you. And that's how we all met. And I was like, oh, powerful, 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 following up. And we reached out and but I say all of that to say I was one of those people where I know how to do what I know how to do, and she said, Tiffany, because I wanted to give the book away, it's part of the lead magnet thing to get people. And she said, you need to sell this book. You need to sell this book. This book is good. You need to sell this book. And I'm like, but I don't have the keywords and I don't have the this and I don't have the that. I still haven't sold the book, but here's the thing. I'm about to, because I'm going to do a workshop where I give away my time for the cost of the book. And that way I am selling the book, but it still feels powerful to me because I'm able to, and this is not about sales, but it's about taking that leap and saying, my time is valuable. So I can't just give it away unless it's hard work. And what Femi said was done was better than, all the thinking I've been doing. This book has been sitting. Haven't worked together in almost a year.
Mm-hmm.
And that book, just in the 3 people I sent it to, was like, this book needs to be out. This book needs to be given away. This book needs to be sold. Not, oh, look at me, the great writer, but oh, look at how powerful this can be for the right person if you can unlock the key that starts them doing the processing of their trauma. And sometimes the creativity is the key to processing the trauma. And sometimes creativity lets them know, I need the professional help. And that too is a beautiful and powerful thing. So
let me jump in because before we bring Slangston and Malik into this conversation, I do want to acknowledge what just happened here is that first of all, I just found out that this is your client, Femi. This is fantastic. Something, and of course I'm going to take credit for it. And I didn't even know it happened, right? But what I want to say is that I think the powerful part, the significant part that we're learning is that despite the fact that Tiffany, you've been working with other people and coaching other people as a writer, that you still found it necessary and important to seek help in coaching yourself. And when I'm looking at these comments, like Isabella, for instance, is putting in the chat that she currently hosts poetry, writes poetry, does oral history work, they're separate, wants to know, and it sounds like is probably in a position that is forward-facing and facilitates opportunities for other people, but not recognizing the need or the possibility of getting assistance herself to kind of bring all these parts together and to identify what is missing. And so I think even saying that something that people are not realizing is that it's okay to get help. It's okay to be coached,
Mhm.
even if you're the coach. That's
Yeah.
okay. And you know, you may think my big age, I shouldn't be, that it's okay. It's okay to ask for help. And so I would love to hear let's Malik and then Slangston, you bring us home. If you can tell what are some of these things that you're seeing show up when you are working with other people that are obstacles for them to define and to design this writing life.
Yeah, I think one of the things is like people's mm, uh, whatever barriers they have to reading, whether that's an inhibition, a resistance, lack of interest. I think very firmly believe in if you're a writer, you need to read, you need to study, you need to know what people have done, who they're in conversation with, uh, what they've written about, the sort of obstacles that they went through in order to make their writing careers, especially like Black writers, Black queer writers, Black women writers, Black writers who are living in multiple intersections of marginalization, especially. So I think for me, that's the biggest thing. I just like want people to like read and study and take writing, if you're going to do it beyond a sort of like personal practice, to take it on as a discipline. And as in any discipline, there's like the craft, right? The things that you do within your own writing, but then there's like the history, and the broader field, the context you're working within. I don't think one can do very compelling writing if they're not operating within that, consciously operating within that context. So that's my big thing.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Slangston, bring us into your world. What, you do a coaching that just isn't just about writing, but also writing for performance. Um, and so I would love to know some of the things that you've encountered, and especially since those that you've coached have run the gamut, haven't always been adults and have usually been young people, so has there been a difference in some of these obstacles that you've seen? What are some of those things that you've had to help people push through?
So I've seen it from different um, two different worlds at the same time, and two different challenges to them that are also kind of related. So one being on the side of the youth poetry world, um, having youth who come up in the youth poetry world and spoken word world particularly, um, often the challenge is transitioning into the adult world because you come up with so much of a support system and there's this enthusiasm and this energy around the youth poetry world, especially for those who excel in it at a really high level, whether it's like National Slam and Brave New Voices and Youth Poet Laureate. And then, one day you're not 19 anymore, and all of a sudden you're in the adult poetry world, and that same support system isn't there the same way. And so that can really be hard to navigate. And especially from Baltimore, people see on the outside looking in a lot of youth who successfully transition from being youth poets to being adult poets. They see the metamorphoses. They see these poets who come out of our ecosystem in Baltimore and become these nationally celebrated slam poets. But for every four or five of them who do that, there's another 25 to 40 who don't make that transition successfully. And a lot of that has to do with like how did you go from this thing was so exciting when you're youth, now all of a sudden you're expected to be a full-time professional artist and you have to figure out how to find your own resources and you have to figure out how to pay the rent off of your poems. And so that can be really challenging. Where on the flip side, with the adult world, for those who don't come up with that kind of support system and ecosystem, and then they're like, all right, I'm grown. I've been writing for most of my adult life. How do I start to really take this serious and be like a professional poet, professional writer? And it can be difficult. It can be a bit of a learning curve because if you didn't come up with that kind of support system around like the fundamentals, and like really learning that stuff easy, it can almost be like someone who grows up skateboarding and then all of versus someone who like is an adult and it's like I want to skateboard. It's like they're like, well, there's a lot of fundamental stuff that may not have been there, and it's like you go to like the open mic and it's like, okay, everyone has this opportunity to share, and everyone is can be warm and welcoming. But then you try to step into the professional realm of it, whether it's submitting things for publication or entering a slam and walking away with a rejection to your portfolio or a 5.7 high score in a slam out of 10. And it's just like, well, it could feel like I'm not good at all. Where sometimes it might just be like not having the support system to, or someone to tell you the difference between, okay, um, this was an authentic expression that you wrote down in your notebook. Now here are the steps to getting it to where it's fundamentally and technically on point with this is strong writing too. And sometimes it really is just the difference between having a support system and not having a support system, and not necessarily not having the skill or the talent, but having that community there, whether it's writing circles or writing workshops, to be able to run your work through that feedback system. Where if you grow up with that system, it kind of becomes innate, where it's like, okay, you can kind of work through it yourself. So it's two different unique challenges from like two different angles, but are like very much both parts of like those worlds of like how do you
Yeah.
transition from
Yeah,
okay, I
I
write
think
and this feels great, and I was like, I'm a professional and I have to figure out how to make this marketable.
it's so interesting that you split it that way, because I see the issue being the same, but even though the worlds are a little bit different, I still see the issue being the same. And I think that there's a through line in what each one of you have said that really speaks to, you show up wanting to write, but there is an entirely different skill set that you also need to build, that may not even have anything to do with writing. And so with Femi, I heard that skill, that in that toolkit that you need to have this understanding that to turn off that voice that makes the excuses of all the reasons why you don't just finish something. So turn off the perfectionism, turn off the as Toni Morrison talks about, the white gaze on your shoulder, turn that off and just finish something, because the editing and all that comes after. With Tiffany, I heard that you need to just decide to do it, be able to ask for help. You know, with Malik, in answer to this question, but even before, when talking about Kaveh Khanum, like the rejection, not necessarily letting all these ideas of what you should be doing dictate what you are doing. So that also is a muscle that you have to build to be able to turn off those voices, to be able to push through. And then what you're saying, Slangston, I definitely hear when you talk about the support system. It makes me think a lot of just the educational system when we think of traditional school spaces, and we talk about children who excel, and always referencing what's happening at home, even though everyone's going to school, but the impact of what happens at home impacts the success in the school system. I actually when I was doing a podcast for homeschooling, I had a young man who wanted to homeschool and his parents were against it. But he went to a prestigious school and was kind of fed up with the fact that he was held up as this beacon of success for the school, but he knew that he had grandparents that were scientists, and he knew all the things that he had before he even got to the school to help him be academically successful. And he would witness the school not provide the same services and supports for his peers, and there'd be consequences for them not being successful, although he knew that he came to the table already with all these privileges. And so when you talk about a support system and writers, um, I don't think a lot of writers recognize that that's something they a lot of times have to create for themselves. Showing up to events like this, or going to spaces and really navigating this literary landscape to create the support system for yourself. But I love what you and Malik articulated as a support system, as this group, as Malik talked about craft and reading and getting better, something that's going to hold you accountable. because we don't talk about that. Who holds you accountable to this writing life? So at this time right now, I would love it if those who are on the call with us, if you can put your questions for the panelists in the chat. Start putting your questions in the chat, and I'll have one final question for the panelists before we start getting to questions. And I want the panelists to share with us that one thing that you believe, because I'm looking at the chat and folks are sharing. It seems like a lot of folks have already started writing projects, but are trying to find ways to either professionalize this writing that they're doing, whether it's selling a book or being able to do this writing thing full time. And so if you can respond to this idea of this full-time writing life, what that looks like for you, what are some things that you maybe have coached or helped other people realize, and what some of those possibilities, I know that's a lot, but if you can have a succinct response to how to get started on that of having a professional writing life, what is that first step that you recommend for them? And we're going to start with Malik, and then go to Slangston, and then Femi, and then Tiffany.
Yeah, I think right now, if you're in DC, there's a really cool exhibit up about Essex Hemphill. If you're not familiar with him, he's a Black gay man who was a poet, contemporaries of Audre Lorde, Amiri Baraka, that whole coterie of people. Beautiful exhibit at the Phillips Collection. Go check it out. But something that he said that was shared by friends of his at an event in honor of him was, if I can go to some job and work 8 hours, I can go home and work 4 hours for myself, right? And seeing oneself, seeing one's art, seeing one's craft as worthy of the labor, of the time, of the energy. Because in reality, for the majority of us, right, like especially in this economy, being able to live off of your writing is very rare, unfortunately. That's just an unfortunate truth. And most writers have day jobs. And, I know people who live off of their writing full time. And I can name like two of the writers I know who do that. But, most other writers are like university professors, or they work some boring ass job or something, and they like carve out time within that to write. So it is a labor, it is a discipline. Simultaneously, I will also say, up until recently, I was a bookseller, and thanks to a grant from the DC government, the grant Khadijah was acquainted to my work through, I was able to cut back my hours and work like 3 days a week instead of five. And that gave me a considerable amount of time to focus on my work and finish my book. The book is finished, Khadijah. I'm looking for a home for it. Um, so, as you're navigating like the Tetris of how to create time and energy and space for your writing, always also look for resources like from your local government, from your state government, even the federal government, for like artist grants, right? Like the DC Commission on the Arts Humanities for folks in DC has an artist grant that closed recently, unfortunately. But they have grants available for any art. Like if you think of it, they have a grant for it. So do that research to figure out what monetary resources are available to you from your state, local government, based on any identities you have, because those monetary resources hopefully will allow you to cut back your working hours and invest more time into your art. So that's my thing. Just like you probably won't be able to be a full-time writer just living off of that, but there are ways that you can like find resources that will allow you to invest more time into your art.
Fantastic. Slangston, you got something for us?
From a practice standpoint, I can tell you in full honesty, there are certain things that have been either handed down to me or that I have devised myself that I have consistently failed to pull off, like in terms of practice, like write every single day rarely happens. Or I for myself, I designed in the last few years this entire template because I wear a lot of creative hats and I show up in the art world in so many different ways, right? Like, you know me as Slangston, but there are four other me's who are constantly out there at some point. Like I just released in the last 7 months 2 hip hop albums that have nothing to do with me as Slangston Hughes. And so like there's all of these different creative paths. And so it's like to find the time to create, promote, market, like all of this as an independent artist, and then figure out how do I get back to the practice part with some hours left in the day. And so I created this template where, okay, Monday, one of me writes, Tuesday, another writes, Wednesday, Thursday is another one. We edit on Friday. The weekend is for catching up. I can't even tell you how many weeks, let alone how many days I actually was able to stick to that template. Because there's just so much that is happening at one time. And you're trying to, and you have this whole wheelbarrow of creative endeavors. And so often the hardest part is not taking something out, it's figuring out what to take out. And sometimes you have to just be, if you know something else is not going to be, there's not going to be space for it, putting it to the side actually means that you'll be able to execute the other things better. So from a practice standpoint, it's like figuring out the time management part. And specifically for writing, like something Nikki Finney said in a workshop I was privileged enough to be in was, you're never going to find time to write. You have to make the time to write. So it's as much of a task that has to be done as much as the actual writing part is. And then to the other side of the coin, like Malik was saying, something that I recently really just like doubled down on is like, I'm not chasing money or money opportunities as much as I'm chasing where the money is. And often that comes in grants, figuring out what grants fit what projects, and just executing and approaching it the same way you would a creative project. And be like, all right, I'm going to submit this proposal, I'm going to submit this grant, I'm going to apply to this fellowship. Because all they can do is say no, but there's no opportunity for the yes if you don't actually chase it down. And so sometimes it's like not necessarily chasing other streams of revenue as much as it is chasing where the money itself is.
Fantastic. Femi?
So I was just thinking of how I could connect what Malik and Slangston said. So what I was thinking was intentionality, right? If this is what you want, then you have to find the time. So, it's easy to blame so many things happening. But if you say, you know what, the only time I'm gonna really have is if I wake up in the morning at 4 o'clock and get it done before I have to get my kids up, or if you don't have kids and I got to get ready for work, then get up at 4 o'clock, which means you need to go to bed at 9 o'clock, right? So that, and then set boundaries, right? And not in a rigid way, but kind of a way that will allow you to feel at peace with the work that you need to do, and that you can get things done. You can reach that intentional purpose. So I was thinking about Mo Better Blues, how the main character, Bleak Gilliam, he was like, don't call between 2 and 4, or don't buzz my bell because I'm practicing. Well, sometimes you have to create that space where you just say, listen, this is my time and I need you to respect it. And then finally, I think, like this idea of belief, right? Whatever it is, your the higher power or the thing, or if it's just about believing in yourself, I think that's very important to the process of being a creative. Are those things: intentionality, boundaries, and that belief, that growth mindset always.
Perfect. Excellent. And then Tiffany?
I'm gonna try and keep this to 3 things. One, connect. You gotta, soon as the last panel was over, before I reached out to everyone that was in that panel and tried to find a common ground for us to continue moving forward in some way together, whether it was, can I share my expertise in this and can you give me your expertise in this? I've already reached out to Malik like 3 times in the private, just saying, hey, I remember this part. Can we talk about this offline? Um, Two, it's been repeated, which is make the time. You're never gonna find it. You need to make it. And if you respect it, other people around you will respect it. And even if they don't, when you set that boundary, they'll be less likely to breach the boundary when you do. And the third one, which I didn't realize was the thing I needed, which was gamify the whole thing. Gamify it. Make it into a game. And I don't mean where a game you don't take seriously, but that risk reward situation where I'm gonna write for an hour on my book. I'm a publisher. All these books are books I've edited, published, or they're mine. And there are multiple bestsellers here. And I can work on these all day, all night. And my book, my 5-day trauma writing kit is languishing. My fantasy novel is languishing. My slam poetry that I don't slam to nobody but myself is languishing. But
Oh
when
my
I said I'm gonna give myself an hour and 45 minutes on Friday, and I'm just gonna do it, and I'm gonna work on my own book. I like that time. It was a time where I was fully awake, fully aware, and it worked for me. And I might have to move it around on certain days, but I committed to that time. Turns out I want more writing time now. So I gave myself some on Monday. I have small kids. I'm in a sandwich generation. I'm dealing with all kinds of things like that. But because I did that, I'm writing plays now. I'm writing the generational I wrote the generational Black Pioneers play featuring Willie Buchanan last year because I made myself available and said, yes, I can do it. And because I gamified the way I work, I hit the deadline and gave us plenty of time to tweak, to retweak, to go back in. And so when it went to stage, thank you. When it went to stage, I was in a place where I wasn't playing catch up. So gamify, gamify, gamify.
I love it. And you know, I resonate with what you said, you can do all this work for other people. And then when it comes to focusing on your own projects, that's sometimes where things languish. And I will say, it's not glamorous. And I don't think I've ever said this on a recorded setting, but it's real, having a notepad and pencil in the bathroom or using your phone. I've written on a toilet, I've written while waiting for my daughter, like picking her up somewhere. Those I look at time. There's time I could be doing something in all of these empty spaces that I could be writing and devoting to my craft. And I think a lot of times we don't think it goes back to what was said earlier about, it might be hard to find time. You have to make time. But I also would say that and I heard this in Femi's response about the discipline. And I think a lot of people, I had mentioned this very succinctly last night in passing through a question that was being posed, but about the time that we exist in now, where a lot of people want to be seen, but don't necessarily want to reciprocate. And so what I mean by that, we're in a societal time where the idea of writing, and you want folks to you want to be known as a writer, but you really haven't deconstructed what this pathway is in the process of writing. Malik talked about reading, learning about the craft, building your craft. Femi's talking about having the discipline to stick to something, right? Slangston's talking about finding a community, because then this community, you're workshopping work, you're getting feedback, you're learning how to give feedback, but to receive it as well. And a lot of times I've noticed lately that it's in this microwavable society we exist in, that those moments, people don't see value in them. And that in itself, that journey, that process is what this writing life really is about. And so It's going to force you, it's going to require you to step outside of your comfort zone, to engage with other people, to build these skills and these muscles in other areas that aren't just writing itself. You're going to have to be vulnerable. You're going to have to be in community with other writers. Writing is a very solitary act alone, but all of these things is what makes it communal in its essence. When we talk about liberatory practice, and we talk about wanting a lot of times speaking truth to power, and we can do that through fiction and through poetry, just as we can do it through journalism, through nonfiction, through social media posts. But a lot of that begins with the interior work that many of our panelists have talked about, getting yourself right, right? What was Lauryn Hill say? I'm not going to even, I'm horrible with quotes and like trying to do hip hop lyrics and they'll be wrong. But what she said is something, if you're not right within, how you gonna win if you ain't right within? That's accurate, correct? How you gonna win if you ain't okay? Well, that's the thesis of what I'm saying. And when we talk about liberatory practice, that in designing this writing life, it all of these things that come together. And so I want to Isabel is asking, similar to yesterday's panel, I'd love to hear some books that have informed everyone's practice. I think this is an excellent question. What are some things that you're reading? Malik, I think you had started with sharing some of the things that you were reading. You also talked about the exhibit in DC, but what are some books and some things that you would recommend to folks?
I dropped some in the chat, but Audre Lorde's Chosen Poems Undersong, the revised edition, that's like pivotal for me in my writing. I think if you want a book about writing and writing life, Adrienne Rich's What Is Found There, Notebooks of Poetry and Politics. Like Adrienne Rich, I was a white lady who knew what she was doing. I give that to her. That was a really good book about writing. Trying to think what else. Toni Morrison, Sula, just beautiful sentences, beautiful characterization. It's not poetry, but I think you can learn a lot about writing and the use of words and sentences and color and everything through Toni Morrison's work, especially the first 5 books. Yeah, I'll just stop there.
Okay,
Don't
Also,
sleep
thank you.
on song lyrics either. Like songs and Nina
Mm.
Simone's For Women is the treatise on the 4 types of women, the colorism within it. Like you can break that thing down into a whole paper. So don't sleep on lyrics within songs. Common is beautiful about things like that. DMX actually said a few beautiful things. We already know Lauryn Hill's gonna say some stuff. But even going back, Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, Mercy Me, The Ecology, all of this was a form of protest and writing for liberation, but they were in 3-minute snippets that people could groove to so it could get in and get out. So think about that.
Okay, all right. Femi, your books?
You muted, Femi?
So sorry about that. I just went on and didn't realize I was muted. So I will say that James Baldwin's If Beale Street Could Talk is one of my favorites. And Their Eyes Were Watching God, Zora Hurston. Those two are my absolute. It's fiction, but there's such great storytelling that even if you are writing creative nonfiction, I think they're just great pieces. I even look at like, when I was really learning how to write for news, right? I would read newspapers just to see structure. And what I realized later on when I was like helping people do like self-help books, I was like, you need to read some Wall Street Journal feature articles, New York Times feature articles, because they will always set it up with a story, pull you in with a narrative, like a human narrative, and then give you the data and weave it in. And that's essentially what a lot of people want to do when they're writing some sort of self-help, is envelope it with, story and what people need to do. So those are the places I feel people should look. And I love a good listicle, I won't even lie. So if we came up with 10 books you really need to be a great writer, yeah.
I love it. Slangston, you gonna bring us home?
I definitely co-sign that particular Audre Lorde book. June Jordan's um, full collection, like historical collection. I think it's either written by Desire or designed by Desire. And it also includes like essays about the different periods of her writing, and she talks a lot about like how all of her writing, no matter the genre or the discipline, really is poetry because she started with poetry. So she is like a jazz musician who starts with a particular instrument. They play every instrument with those sensibilities, and I really like resonate and have like always kind of like built around that myself because if you do it that way, no matter which form your writing takes, your voice will always be present and strong. So the way that June Jordan kind of talks about that foundationally in those essays is like really pivotal for me. Amiri Baraka's SOS collection is another big one. And there was another one that popped in my head as y'all were talking. Mm, it ran away. Um, I don't know, but yeah, those are definitely Oh no, I was
Well,
gonna say Dudley Randall's writing about Black poetry from the time period
mm,
when he was publishing so many different Black poets through his press is a really big inspirational thing for me because to me, like, there are writers who were giants and they left their footprints, and then there are like the Dudley Randalls who like made it possible for multiple footprints to be left by multiple Black writers, and like that's something I've always aspired to and approach. Um, approach the art form in a way where it's like, well, how many footprints can I make a way for other than just mine and leave not just
yeah.
a trail but an entire map for the future.
Yeah, that's I share that with you. That's actually the first book I published was an anthology. I'm really big on anthologies, and bringing voices together and creating spaces for other people. So I love that you end with that. I think that you all have shared some really great tips for those who are looking to design their writing life. I think that all of you all represent such different parts of the spectrum of the literary landscape. And so I thank you so much. I also appreciate the fact that you all spoke from perspective of writing where it wasn't aspirational to be published by a top 5 publishing house or to be in this white gaze or to, it was all your advice was around really being authentic to your voice, but also finding alternatives to what are a lot of mainstream pathways to publishing. So I thank you for that. I thank everyone who tuned in today, who joined us. For those who may be watching this as a recording, and it's a comment section, I encourage you to add to the list any books that you too find useful for us all to kind of learn from. I'm looking to compile a list based on what we're sharing in each of these panels. I want to thank you, all my panelists. I
Thank
look
you.
forward to things like this because I get to see you all and be in conversation with you. And not always having that time to connect. So these are great ways to connect with you. I look at you as being part of my community. So thank you for being part of
Thank
this
you.
inaugural teaching. And for everyone listening, tomorrow is the last day of our teaching. I will be sending a homework assignment like I did last night for you to work on. It will again be a writing prompt. Again, we will have an opportunity tomorrow to share in the closing portion of the teaching. If you are interested in sharing, there is a sign up that was sent to you in the first email that I sent out, but I will resend that today when I send the second writing assignment. Tomorrow will be the reading from Rebels Zygus, which is our publication, digital publication, as well as some friends of Black Writers for Peace and Social Justice. And then we will have our closing ceremony. Thank you so much for being part of our inaugural teach-in, and we will see you tomorrow. Bye.
Khadijah.
Hi, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.